Every DRAM chip CXMT ships out of Hefei passed through a canister of liquid photoresist that left a factory in Japan. Not a factory in China. Not a factory anywhere else. One canister, one country, one choke point sitting at the very start of the line. The question this map is trying to answer is not whether CXMT can make DRAM. It already can. The question is whether the web of inputs keeping that fab alive has an alternate route, or whether, if Tokyo decided to hold that canister at the border, the line in Hefei simply goes cold. A semiconductor breakthrough is not a faster chip. It is a change in the topology of a dependency map. A new domestic node opens, a formerly terminal dead end gets a bypass, and the shape of the web shifts. The story of CXMT is the story of which lines in that web China has already rerouted, which are mid-construction, and which remain single-thread. One supplier, one country, no alternate path. To read this map, start at the output end. A finished DDR5 module, the kind going into a Chinese server rack or an artificial intelligence training cluster, and walk backward toward the source. The module is a road surface. You can look at it, drive on it, ship data across it. What nobody photographs is the drainage system beneath, the subgrade, the material inputs that the road is sitting on, and that determined whether the road holds. Walk backward from the module, and the first branch point you reach is the packaging substrate, the laminate board the memory die is bonded to before the module ships. Here, the map already has a fork. Domestic Chinese suppliers, including JCET and Tongfu Microelectronics, have established real packaging and assembly capability. Industry analyst reports confirm that mainland substrate makers have entered volume production on configurations relevant to CXMT's current output. The highest bandwidth module configurations, the ones with the most demanding signal integrity requirements, still draw partly from Taiwanese and Japanese substrate suppliers, according to those same reports. But the core packaging route is no longer a thread that runs exclusively offshore. This is the node where the domestic buildup story is most justified. It is also the easiest node on the map, and I want to say that plainly, because the instinct to count packaging as a supply chain victory is understandable, but misleading if it stops the trace here. Declaring partial independence by pointing at packaging is like announcing you can frame a house because you own a hammer while your lumber supplier is in another country. The substrate and assembly steps genuinely have domestic alternatives, but the substrate sits at the output end of the chain. The canister sits at the input end. The map still has a long way to run. Node, DDR5 packaging substrate. Status, a junction. China has already routed around. Domestic alternatives exist and are in volume production, with higher bandwidth configurations still drawing partly from external suppliers per analyst reports, but the core packaging route is no longer a single-thread dependency. Follow the line back into the fab itself. This is where the canister enters the picture. DRAM fabrication is a sequence of several hundred process steps, cycling through deposition, lithographic exposure, and etch. Deposition grows a thin film of material onto the wafer surface. Etch removes material where the pattern calls for removal. Between every exposure and every etch, a layer of photoresist, the liquid from the Japanese canister, is spun across the wafer surface in a uniform film at the coating track. For the deposition and etch tools, China has documented progress. Naura Technology Group and Advanced Microfabrication Equipment have both disclosed chemical vapor deposition, atomic layer deposition, and etch tools that are deployed in domestic Chinese fabs. Industry analyst reports suggest these tools are competitive at the mature node process generations where CXMT's current production sits, meaning the 19 nanometer and 17 nanometer class where the company's disclosed products live. Whether domestic alternatives fully substitute for every step in the DRAM etch sequence at the critical patterning steps is not independently confirmed, and I think precision matters here. A partial bypass is not the same as a complete bypass, and partial is doing real work in that sentence. The bypass exists at the mature end of the step sequence. It is not paved all the way through. The canister itself is a different story. Tokyo Oka Kogyo and Shin-Etsu Chemical are the names attached to the photoresist that feeds advanced DRAM fabs in the region. The chemistry inside that canister, the polymer architecture, the photoacid generator formulations, the purity specifications, has been refined over decades of process co-development with the fabs running it. At sub-20 nanometer dimensions, resist performance is not a single specification. It is a constellation of interdependent properties that interact with the specific exposure tool and the specific etch chemistry downstream. Reports confirm that Chinese domestic resist development programs exist. Several companies have disclosed research and development activity. But volume-qualified advanced DRAM resist from a Chinese supplier has not been independently confirmed. The resist canister is like a proprietary ink formulation that only one supplier makes at the tolerance this particular press requires. You can build the press domestically. You can build the building it sits in. But if the ink has to come from one town in Japan, the press only runs as long as that town keeps shipping. Node, Deposition and etch tools, contested against the American leader in process equipment, and advanced photoresist from the Japanese chemistry suppliers. Status: Deposition and etch. A choke point. With a bypass under construction, with Naura and advanced microfabrication equipment covering a growing share of the step sequence and full substitution at advanced DRAM patterning steps unconfirmed. Advanced photoresist. A choke point with no confirmed bypass. Domestic alternatives are reported to be in development, with no independent verification of volume-qualified advanced node resist from a Chinese supplier. The coated wafer moves to the exposure tool. This is where the photoresist meets light. Deep ultraviolet light, in CXMT's case, because extreme ultraviolet lithography machines are export-controlled and no extreme ultraviolet tool has been confirmed inside a Chinese DRAM fab. ASML holds what is effectively a sole position in extreme ultraviolet lithography. No other company ships those scanners at commercial scale. In deep ultraviolet, ASML also leads with its most advanced scanner line, though Nikon holds a smaller position. The Dutch government, following coordination with the United States, has restricted shipment of advanced deep ultraviolet and all extreme ultraviolet tools to Chinese fabs. CXMT therefore runs on deep ultraviolet tools acquired before those controls tightened, plus whatever domestic scanner capability exists. Shanghai Microelectronics Equipment Group has disclosed deep ultraviolet scanner development programs, but independent benchmarks confirming competitive performance at DRAM-relevant dimensions are not publicly available. The technical route around extreme ultraviolet is multi-patterning with deep ultraviolet, exposing the same layer multiple times, each pass with a slight offset, to achieve smaller effective feature sizes than a single exposure could produce. It works. DRAM at roughly current dimensions has been manufactured with multi-patterning outside China. The cost is more process steps, more resist cycles per wafer, more tool time, and lower throughput per unit of capital. Multi-patterning with deep ultraviolet instead of extreme ultraviolet is like routing a freight line over a mountain ridge by switchback instead of through the direct tunnel that is closed. The goods arrive, but you burn more fuel per ton, the transit time doubles, and every mile of extra track pulls on other inputs. Critically, More resist cycles per wafer means more canisters consumed per die, which tightens the dependency on the Japanese chemistry rather than loosening it. The lithography bypass exists as a technical route. It reaches its destination while making every adjacent node more constrained in the process. Node: lithography, where ASML sits as the contested node. Status: a choke point with a bypass under construction. Deep ultraviolet multi-patterning provides a genuine technical route for current DRAM dimensions with throughput and cost penalties. Domestic deep ultraviolet scanner capability is reported, but not independently benchmarked at DRAM relevant dimensions. Extreme ultraviolet access remains closed with no confirmed domestic alternative. While the canister is open at the coating track and the exposure tool is running its multipass sequence, the process chambers around it are consuming specialty gases continuously. Nitrogen trifluoride for chamber cleaning between runs. Hydrogen fluoride for selective etch steps. Various precursor gases for deposition layers. Japan is a significant supplier of several of these gases into Asian semiconductor supply chains, alongside South Korean and European producers. Companies including Showa Denko have supplied into this part of the web. China has domestic gas production capability at the commodity end. The most demanding purity specifications for semiconductor-grade specialty gases have more concentrated supplier bases. Reports indicate that China has been expanding domestic specialty gas production across several categories, with some showing meaningful domestic share entering fabs. The precise breakdown by gas type and specification class is not uniformly available in public reporting, but the picture that emerges is a node under active domestic development rather than a terminal choke point. Think of specialty gases as the water pressure in the system. The pipes, the tools, and the treatment chemistry, the resist, get the attention. But without consistent, high-purity gas environment at every step, the resist chemistry stops performing as specified even if the canister is correct. You can have the right ink and still produce defective output if the ambient conditions during printing drift. This node is closing. It has not closed. Node: specialty process gases from Japanese and international suppliers. Status: a choke point. With a bypass under construction, domestic production is expanding across several gas categories, with the most demanding purity specifications representing the remaining gap. No independent confirmation that all critical gases are domestically sourced at full fab scale volume. Now the map reaches the node where the line goes cold, and I want to slow the trace here because this is the node that gets the least coverage relative to how much it constrains everything else. After every exposure step, after every etch cycle, the fab must measure. Overlay metrology is the measurement of whether layer N registered correctly on layer N-1, whether the pattern that was just printed landed within single-digit nanometers of where it was supposed to land. Defect inspection is the detection of particles, voids, and pattern collapses that would propagate through subsequent steps and kill the die. The tools that perform these measurements at advanced DRAM dimensions are supplied primarily by KLA Corporation, a United States company, with smaller positions held by Onto Innovation and Hitachi High-Tech. No Chinese domestic metrology tool has been independently confirmed through teardowns, yield data, or third-party process benchmarks to perform at the overlay sensitivity required for leading-edge DRAM production. The case for this being a permanent dead end is real, and it rests on something more than a hardware specification gap. KLA's installed base spans thousands of fabs across decades of process generations. Its tools are matched to specific process flows. Its software integrates with process control systems built around its measurement outputs. To validate a domestic overlay tool, you need a reference measurement, something you already trust, to confirm your new tool is reading correctly. But the reference is the tool you're trying to replace. The calibration loop is circular in exactly the way that trying to calibrate a ruler by measuring it with itself is circular. The reference problem does not go away until you have an independent, trusted reference, which is the thing you're building. This compounding advantage, calibration data, process matching records, integration depth, does not dissolve under sustained investment. It compounds further while the investment is catching up. The case for a bypass arriving is also real. Chinese metrology companies, including Skyverse Technology and Huawei Micro, have disclosed development programs, and industry sources in China report tool trials underway in domestic fabs. The specifications required at 19-nanometer DRAM are less demanding than at the frontier nodes Samsung and SK Hynix are pushing toward. A domestic metrology tool that is adequate for CXMT's current production generation is a plausible near-term outcome. A domestic metrology tool adequate for the process nodes CXMT would need to reach to compete at the frontier is a different and much harder target. My read is that the metrology gap is more constraining than the lithography gap in the near term, and this cuts against where most of the coverage lands. Extreme ultraviolet gets the headlines. Lithography is the glamour node. But a technical bypass around lithography exists right now. Multi-patterning with deep ultraviolet is a real route, expensive and throughput limited, but real. No equivalent bypass exists for not knowing whether your last etch step landed where it was supposed to. Yield collapses silently without metrology. You keep running wafers and you don't know why the good die count is falling. The lithography constraint is a wall you can see. The metrology constraint is the floor giving way under you, the synthesis. At current production nodes, a domestic path through metrology may be achievable sooner than most timelines suggest. At the nodes needed to compete with the Korean manufacturers, no independent teardown confirms a homegrown replacement yet. And the validation loop problem means that gap compounds rather than simply persists. This is the one node on the map where both the permanent dead-end case and the bypass is coming case have genuine footing, which is precisely what makes it the honest break on the whole web. Step back and read the full map. The packaging substrate node is routed around, domestic alternatives in volume production. The deposition and etch tool node has a bypass under construction, with Naura and advanced microfabrication equipment covering a growing share of the mature node step sequence. The lithography node has a technical bypass through multi-patterning, with domestic scanner programs in progress and no independent benchmark yet. Specialty gases are expanding domestically across several categories, with the most demanding specifications still lagging. Advanced photoresist has no confirmed domestic bypass at volume. High-end overlay and inspection metrology has no confirmed domestic substitute at leading-edge specifications, and the validation loop problem makes the path to one harder than it looks from the outside. This web is not close to self-contained, but it is not static. The bypasses being built are real. They are not announcements. They are tools in fabs, substrates in modules, gases in process chambers. What the map shows is a web that has been substantially rerouted at its output end and through its mature process middle while remaining single thread at exactly the nodes that determine whether the next generation of DRAM is achievable. Resist chemistry, metrology, and the validation infrastructure that ties them together. CXMT can sustain current production under present conditions. That is the map's honest reading of the routed nodes. But scaling to the process, generations needed to compete with the Korean manufacturers runs directly into the nodes that have no bypass yet. The shape of the web has changed. The dead end has not moved. That canister of photoresist, the one that left a Japanese factory, cleared customs, arrived at a Hefei cleanroom, was opened at a coating track, and was spun across the surface of a wafer that became a DRAM die that became a DDR5 module, is still the clearest way to read the whole map. Every bypass that has been built, every domestic tool that has been qualified, every substrate that no longer routes through Japan, none of it changes the line that runs back to that canister. Until that line has a domestic fork, the web has a single thread at its most sensitive point, not at the output, at the input. Where the chemistry starts, the map is mostly drawn. The one line that still runs cold is the one nobody is photographing. The node I would watch next is not lithography and not resist. It is metrology. If a Chinese-made overlay tool receives an independent process qualification at a leading-edge DRAM fab, that changes the shape of this web in a way that most of the coverage will miss entirely, because metrology is the invisible node, and the headlines will still be about extreme ultraviolet scanners. The question for the comments: which node do you think gets a confirmed bypass first? Resist chemistry or metrology? And what would the evidence actually look like when it arrives? Not an announcement, not a disclosure. What would a real confirmation look like? Leave your red below. If you want to keep tracing these webs as the map changes, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next node readout will land here before it lands anywhere else.